Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the third webinar in the series from the Agripreneurship Alliance on climate change and the African entrepreneur. I'm really delighted about this session this morning. The topic that we're looking at is carbon. And whilst carbon is all around us, it's in us, it's in our food, it's in our soils, it is in the air that we breathe. The issue of carbon and climate change is just so interlinked. And because of that, the topic of carbon is becoming more and more important in relation to food systems and food production. And I am not an expert on this topic. I am going to be learning as much as yourselves as participants. And I'm just delighted that today we have got some great speakers who are joining us. Before I start introducing them, can I just mention about interpretation? It's great that we have people from right across Africa joining us today. Obviously, this webinar is mainly in English, but what we will be doing today is that we have the amazing Rim, who is our English to French translator available. So to do this, as always, if you're on a web, go down to the bottom of your screen, click on the globe and choose French. If you are using a smartphone, click on the three dots, tap language, and again, choose French. And hopefully everything will be fine. So today, as I've mentioned, we are going to be speaking about carbon. And as I've already mentioned, carbon is all around us. It has significant implications on our businesses as food producers, whether that is growing food, raising livestock, being involved in agroforestry, and being involved in value addition, primary and secondary processing. Carbon is all around us. And now increasingly, there are some big terms that are increasingly being used. Carbon markets, carbon farming, all these different terms are mysteries to me. But I'm really grateful that our three speakers, core speakers today, are going to help illuminate us. So the first person who is going to speak today is Clarisse. Clarisse is from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and she is a manager in the Food and Agricultural Pathway. Good morning, Clarisse.
Good morning. Bonjour, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us. We've obviously asked you to do a short input about to set the context. Are you going to share your screen?
Yes, so I'll just quickly do that.
Okay, so I will stop my share from my side.
Can you see a slide with a title?
Your screen has come through perfectly. So Clarisse, thank you so much for joining us, and the audience is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you to the Agripreneur Alliance for the invitation. Great to be here. So my name is Clarisse Poramazina, and I work at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And I'm coming in here today from an equitable livelihoods perspective. So when we're discussing action on carbon farming and nature positive action within the food systems, it's very much important to think about how does it create better livelihoods for farmers. And so that's the angle that I will be taking today, this morning. So I'm going to go to the next slide and give a bit of a quick background around my organization, which is the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. So WBCSD is a global CEO-led network of over 200 companies working together to accelerate systems transformation for a net zero, nature positive, and equitable future. So our mission is to support CEOs in setting high-level strategic sustainability visions and provide functional level transformation guidance across a large set of industries. We have a global presence. I'm currently based in Geneva, but we have offices in New York, as well as in Singapore, China, and Amsterdam. We are CEO-led. So we take pride in having CEOs there because it's very important when we discuss sustainable development that we have the highest level of decision-making within the private sector. We are a unique business-only platform, so our members within our business association are companies, but we not only have multinational companies, but we also have SMEs and innovators. And finally, we're market-driven, and we reinforce the business voice to policy and government decisions. So this is a list of some of the logos of some of our companies that we have within our organization as member companies. As you can see, they come from all over the industries, but in my role, I talk specifically to food and agriculture companies. We have over 70 agri-food companies within our organization. Sorry. So now we'll just give a quick definition around natural climate solutions. So natural climate solutions are nature-based solutions that address climate change while also addressing human well-being, resilience, and biodiversity benefits. So natural climate solutions interventions are diverse, and they include actions towards protection and conservation of nature. They also include sustainable management of nature and land. And finally, the restoration of ecosystems. So when we're discussing natural climate solutions, it is all-encompassing, as you can see on this graph, around protecting, improving, and restoring nature. The role here that the private sector can play in scaling nature climate solutions is by closing the funding gap for these interventions and activities by purchasing what we call natural climate solutions carbon credits. So one natural climate solution carbon credit represents 1 metric ton of CO2 equivalent, either reduced or removed from the atmosphere. By engaging in the carbon market, the natural climate solutions carbon market, companies are able to help fund natural climate solutions over the world. So this is a quick introduction into the topic. What are the opportunities here? So the natural climate solutions can support up to around 1/3 of the required mitigation for below 2 degrees pathway by 2030. Voluntary carbon credits can have quadrupled in value since 2021, from $520 million in 2020 to over $2 billion in transaction in 2021. The voluntary carbon markets are expected to grow by tenfold by 2030, with increasing demand for carbon removal credits generated by agriculture and forestry. And the climate finance for small-scale agriculture is disproportionately low and covers only a small fraction of the total needs of small-scale farmers and agribusinesses. The sales price of carbon credits is a critical driver for the viability of carbon projects. And so the role here of agribusinesses, the companies that we speak to, is ideally placed to use their leverage to scale climate funding from offsets and governments and donors to improve smallholder livelihoods. So by engaging in the carbon markets, not only are they improving natural climate solutions for nature, but they can also improve smallholder livelihoods through adaptation and mitigation efforts. However, there are critical success factors for carbon projects to be viable. According to the latest report from TechnoServe, these are the 4 critical success factors to ensure that carbon projects can support livelihoods and mitigation efforts. So, for instance, one key success factor is around the smallholder business case. There needs to be meaningful income benefits for farmers to engage in the carbon markets. And there needs to be short-term cash incentives as well as long-term in-kind benefits. The second success factor is the scale potential. we need to focus in the supply chains that have potential to scale. For instance, tens of thousands of hectares of project land in a traditional standalone project design would be very much viable. The third critical success factor is to have attractive per hectare economics. For example, in this study, it was shown that agroforestry design have the potential to sequester several tons of carbon per hectares. So they have a meaningful impact in the agricultural sector. And finally, we need a supportive and legal political context. It is very much needed in this context for viability in the long term, for the regions where these carbon projects are happening to have a stable and supportive legal and political landscape favorable to private investments, and particularly in the context of supporting climate mitigation efforts. What are the current barriers that we see and that we are acknowledging currently? When it comes to engaging in the carbon markets, there is a high cost of implementation, and that is due to small, fragmented land holdings and very high support requirements, especially at the technical side. There are quite a lot of risks involved. One is around reversal due to the changing farming opportunities and the household needs over a typical project lifespan. When we're talking about a carbon project, we're talking about a 20 to 30 year lifespan. And so there's a lot of risks in terms of who will be part of this carbon project in the long term, and how will that be permanent over the long term, the sequestration of carbon over the long term. There are negative impacts if agroforestry system fails, who have unintended side effects on farm productivity, and there is unclear land tenure and rights that increase risk for farmers and buyers of carbon credits. I'll go quickly into the next barriers to be mindful of time. But the next barriers are the access to technical assistance. The clear business case for farmers, it's currently not necessarily proven that farmers can make a large and improved income from engaging into the carbon markets, and that's due to price uncertainties and complex incentive structures. And finally, there's an unreliability around the methodologies used. So what can we learn from the successful programs that exist currently? And I'm so glad that Rabobank will be coming to speak on some of their projects after me to share some of their successes. So one key successful outcome that we've seen is to establish effective governance structures to engage farmers. The success of engaging farmers and communities through democratically and culturally aligned established cooperative has shown success. And there's evidence of two-way dialogue, detailed consultation to explain and agree the carbon product design and fair terms. FPIC, which is fair, sorry, I forgot the acronym. I'll get back to you on that. The fair practices and engagement of indigenous peoples is necessary to ensure successful carbon projects. We also need fair, transparent pricing. We need clear KPIs and frameworks, and we need to use technology to support farmer engagement. Digitalization will be key here for the successful implementation of carbon projects in the future. So there are currently two options for farmers to engage in the voluntary carbon market. The first option is on the carbon offset programs. These projects support farmers to adopt lower carbon agricultural practices, and they quantify the impact of that change relative to a baseline to generate a registry-issued carbon credit. When the credit is sold, a percentage of that value goes back to the farmer, which lets them monetize that transition and hopefully provides a repeatable, flexible, and growing revenue stream. Typically, it takes the farm 1 to 2 cultivation cycles to generate credits and see a return on investment. And there are normally no funding upfront when it comes to these credits. The advantages of these carbon offset programs are that one, the farmers are empowered to sell their carbon credits to the highest bidder, and the contracts for carbon credits can give assurance of additional payment over the long term. However, the disadvantages of this are that the early adopters cannot be included due to additionality issues, and there's inconsistent transparency around the percentage that farmers are receiving on the credit share. The second option for farmers to engage in the carbon markets are around Scope 3 supply chains programs, so what we call insetting. And these projects utilize existing corporate supply chains to adopt lower carbon agricultural practices, which will reduce corporate Scope 3 emissions. And the quantifying of the impact is related to the product procured. So for example, if a farmer produces a liter of milk, the farmer will receive an agreed price for the milk, as well as a premium linked to the amount of carbon that was reduced. And that's based on an average reduction. The advantages of these type of carbon markets is that the early adopters of lower carbon practices can be included in the program, and there are more cost-effective options for project developers and corporates to establish the supply chain relationships that they already have. And finally, there are less strict requirements, and it is more flexible for farmers to participate. However, the disadvantages here are that the lack of transparency on the premium paid, because it is bespoke on each client program, and there's no visibility on the length of time the premium will be paid. So here's a list of the current barriers that we see within the carbon markets. We see a high cost of measurement. We see a lack of relevant modeling tools and best practice guidance. We see a lack of data. The availability of technical partners to aggregate farmers at scale is missing as well. There's a price uncertainty. There's a lack of farmer-specific guidance to understand market complexity. There's a lack of incentive for project owners to establish good practice. The business case for farmers is not clear currently, and there's a limitation of number of farms that can be in one project. So what is WBCSD doing to help? We've identified 9 entry points for companies to work at the collective level and at the pre-competitive level to support natural climate solutions and carbon markets. The first one was around facilitating building a joint data set at landscape level. The second one is to develop best practice playbook on inclusive and robust farmer engagement, especially trying to translate what are the benefits that farmers will be receiving in engaging in the carbon markets. So creating that business case for farmers. The third entry point is on identifying climate-focused finance and insurance and to prove the business case for how this increases supply chain resilience. The fourth one is around supporting policy development. The fifth entry point is around identifying good farmer engagement and aggregation partners. The sixth entry point is around funding and working with the standards to robust and appropriate methodologies in the agriculture sector. So creating that alignment. The seventh entry point is around investing in digital technologies that support digital monitoring, reporting, and verification to reduce costs and verify action. The eighth entry point is around investing in digital technologies that support farmer aggregation. And finally, the ninth entry point that we've identified is around facilitating discussion around the science-based targets from the farmer's perspective. So this year, we are focusing on developing a guidance for companies on benefits to people due diligence. We want to ensure, in close collaboration with the Natural Climate Solution, that there is out there clear recommendations and guidance for companies to address benefit sharing in the carbon markets. Benefits are not only income related, but they can be other kind of procurement related benefits. For instance, rewarding through premiums, but also through longer contracts with farmers within their supply chains to incentivize best practice. The second activity that WBCSD will be focusing on is to provide a peer learning platform on the best practices to connect smallholder farmers to carbon and nature markets. And the third activity that we'll be focusing on this year is around advocacy and business mobilization. And we will be at the 2023 UN Food System Summit Stocktake in July in Rome, as well as at UNGA in New York, and of course the COP28 in the UAE in November, December. This is it for me. If you would like to know more about the work that we do at WBCSD, feel free to connect with me. This is my email. And I've also added a link here if you'd like to join our farmers network. We're always keen to engage with young farmers and understand what are the pain points and how do we improve them. So if you would like to join our farmers network, I will share the link in the chat. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clarice. That is a real rapid introduction to such a complicated and complex topic, which I know that many of us are only just starting to grapple with. I don't know if there are any questions for you, and I just want to see if there are any quickly within the chat. But a couple of points from myself would be, firstly, that I'm amazed that the carbon market, I think you used the figure of 2021, the credit values that were being sold was $2 billion US. So there is obviously a huge amount of money within this system. But also then, and there's a question here, and I know this will then follow through into our next speaker, which is you mentioned about the two approaches that farmers can engage with this. One is the carbon offset program, where a farmer is directly engaged in producing and selling carbon credits. And I think I've heard a term carbon farming for that. But then there is the Scope 3 programs run by the big, and predominantly, I'm guessing, the big multinational corporate companies that have got significant value chains throughout Africa, and how those companies then manage the carbon programs in relation to the smallholder farmers in their value chains. Does that sound about right, Clarice?
That's exactly true, yes. So the second option, that's what we call now insetting. So it's very much about companies such as, for instance, Nestle, looking at their own operations and supply chains and trying to engage and invest in their Scope 3 emissions, because within their suppliers are where the Scope 3, which is the indirect emissions, are. And so to reduce their Scope 3 emissions, they are engaging with farmers on natural climate solutions and regenerative agricultural practices. And that is how they are engaging farmers within their own supply chains into the carbon market. So they will receive benefits by engaging in that way. And they will be engaging directly with their clients. So that's the second option that now companies are looking into more and more, especially in the agri-food sector, to tackle their Scope 3 emissions.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Anne, were there any questions?
I haven't seen any in the chat, but I've got one. I mean, the carbon offset program certainly implies a certain scale. And do you have any idea, very roughly, what percentage of all these millions is actually getting to smaller farmers?
That's a very good question, Anne. I don't have the number, but it is not a lot. It's very difficult for smallholder farmers to make a significant income currently due to the price of carbon being so low. Currently, for 2.5 ton of CO2, you would receive $35. Sorry, for 1 ton of CO2, you would receive $35. So unless you're a big scale farmer, it is not currently very viable to engage in the carbon market. However, there are going to be aggregation mechanisms to better engage farmers in that way, and also engaging to cooperatives, but also looking at other type of benefits. So premiums, for instance, those are not currently calculated in this funds. So that's also how there are other types of benefits that farmers can receive in engaging that are not necessarily calculated here.
There is light at the end of the tunnel, because we'll hear from Farmstrong and also from Rabobank how they are actually getting money to small farmers. I see there's a question for Isaac, but maybe we'll take that after Farmstrong and Rabobank, because I think they will already partly answer it.
I think so. I also see that Samuel is also raising his hand. But let's move the conversation on. Clarice, thank you so much for your input today. Can I just reassure everybody that we will be sharing the decks from today with everybody so that you'll be able to go back and read everything again that has been shared with us today. So what I would like to do then is go to our next speaker. And I am delighted that we have today an amazing, passionate advocate for the agricultural sector and for small-scale food producers, Michael Hendricks from Farmstrong Foundation. And Michael, I think, is going to be joined by some of his colleagues from Côte d'Ivoire. And we're going to have a bit of a conversation. So, Michael, would you like to come online? Are you still there?
Hello.
Good morning. Good to see you again.
To be honest, I don't see myself, but that doesn't matter. It's probably even better not to see myself. Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much, Stephen, and to invite me for this event. I think it's an extremely important topic to discuss for various reasons, and I think Claire gave an excellent description of how the system works. But I can assure you it's even more complicated in real life. I think also what is important, if you talk about climate, it's not just the carbon, not just the CO2. There are the greenhouse gases which are also very bad for the climate and should be part of these systems. What we face when we started, we are basically a big aggregator of programs. So we work mainly in the cocoa and chocolate industry, but also palm, coffee, cashew, all focused on smallholder farmers in West Africa, partly involved also in East Africa with a coffee foundation, but it's mainly what we'll talk about is what we do in Côte d'Ivoire with Rabobank, and Rabobank will explain a bit more about the system after I'm finished. If you want to engage in these type of programs, as Claire already described, it's very important to create a certain scale, because that's what you need if you want to become an interesting partner of these programs. And that's exactly what we have been able to do in Côte d'Ivoire. And we work with about 30,000 farmers in Côte d'Ivoire, and about 10,000 of them in our program with Rabobank. And what was already illustrated earlier, the interesting part and the important part of this program is how much of these benefits of the sales of your carbon removal units are actually going to the smallholder, because the smallholders, the farmers, are actually doing the work. They are responsible for growing the biomass, which will retain or sequester the CO2. And that's already an important point, which I thought was not necessarily as clear as it could be in Claire's presentation. Here, it's not agriculture. So where we look at in programs like Rabobank, you look actually at the non-agricultural woody biomass created by the farmer in or around his smallholding. That's very important. So that's very important to consider. But also, if you actually want to plant trees, because that's the stuff which absorbs the CO2. First of all, we have to find the seeds. That is in a lot of countries in Africa not very easy to find the seeds, enough seeds with enough germination power in it, with enough biodiversity. That's also an important element. So if you start with these kind of programs, you cannot just set up a tech plantation or teak plantation or eucalyptus. It has to be incorporating a certain level of biodiversity. That's very important. Then when you start with your trees, in your nurseries, grow them up is already a big challenge. And I hope that Ando is there. I've not seen his name, but Ando and Vincent are running our programs in Côte d'Ivoire, setting up the tree nurseries, doing the distribution, training farmers on agroforestry to allow them the maximum amount of CO2 to sequester, and that is then sold through the Rabo Acorn platform. And as you already heard, the prices are actually not bad. You talk about $30 per ton gross revenue, and we pay 80%, which is contractual engaged with the farmers and the programs. 80% of that money goes back to the farmers. As already mentioned, that has to be digital, that has to be safe, because otherwise now the other people run away with the money as usual. And so we have a whole system in place, very important, database, payments, KPIs, geolocalization of the trees, etc., etc. That's very keen to make these programs successful. And then, as already mentioned before, these are markets which will grow immensely because everybody has made huge commitments on net zero, and people are more and more aware about the risk of climate change and how can you mitigate that risk. And these type of programs is a very interesting instrument, very important instrument for this. And on top of that, and that's why I'm so happy that now Stephen and Anne get so many people together. I think there's a huge potential in Africa. In most areas, I must say, in the Sahara it will be a bit tough, but in most areas you have very good climatical conditions to create a lot of woody biomass. So that's the scope for you people there to work as green entrepreneurs, to work with farmers, farmer groups, aggregating farmer groups and get engaged in these programs is phenomenal. That the opportunity is huge, but you have to make sure that you have the right infrastructure in place to get going. What was also mentioned and what is very complicated, again, unfortunately in Africa, already mentioned by Clarice, is what you talk about now, the legal and political landscape. There's a lot of money involved, so everybody knows what happens when there's a lot of money involved. But at the same time, there are not many countries where they have a very good system in place for land ownership, cadastre, land titles, even tree titles. I mean, that's something, a big issue in West Africa. Trees like minerals and other things are owned by the country, not by the individual farmer. Ghana has introduced new laws where actually the farmer who plants the tree is actually the owner of the tree, which is a big step forward, and as well as other countries will follow. So the potential is huge, but the hurdles are there, but no, we can deal with it. And I think now with the initiative of Steve and Anne and the people here, I think we can master, we can reduce those constraints and make this an interesting business where the benefits, revenues can be shared with farmers in a fair way. Because I can assure what I've seen so far around me, not a lot of the revenues actually go back to the small farmer. That is very unfortunate, and I think that is something we have to deal with. How can we make sure that the people who are actually doing the work are also getting the biggest part of the revenues, because they deserve it. And today a lot of people run away with the money of the carbon credits, and the farmer doesn't even know he's part of a program. And there is the transparency so important. So I stop here. I can talk all day about this because this is a really fascinating program. What I just want to add before giving the floor back to Steve is what is very important, what we do with our farmers, small farmers in Côte d'Ivoire, important part of those revenues now in collaboration with these farmers are actually spent on social economic development in their own villages, in their own communities. So we help them with getting land certificates, we help them with getting birth certificates, so support them to make it possible to get through that socio-economic development, which has been now lagging behind so much. And this is a source of revenue for the good, because we work on climate change risk mitigation, and the revenues are used to improve their social conditions and livelihoods. So it's a perfect match. And I think people like yourself now can help your fellow citizens to make this work and create an independency of revenues, because you are earning your own revenues. It's not a cadeau, it's not a present. So it's really a phenomenal opportunity for all of us to make this successful and get as much money for this as possible. Okay, Steve, I'll get, you know me, I can talk forever. So Jasper also have to say his thing, and then maybe there's some questions later on.
Yeah, okay. It's like, let's, as you say, let's leave the questions till later on. I've already got a list, which is, it's really exciting, the work that you're involved in. But if I can just ask one quick question of you now, yes, and please answer this as quickly as short easy as time as you can possibly do so. Linking back to the presentation made by Clarice, she mentioned that there were two strands of carbon programs. direct farmer carbon programs and the Scope 3 ones run within value chains of the corporate sector.
Yeah.
Which the activities that you're describing within Farmstrong, which side of those two programs do you establish yourself?
Well, it's the first one, but that does not mean that our donors, our customers, cannot buy into these programs. And there you get into something with what was now briefly discussed by myself and Clarice, that is not necessarily as fair as it could be. So if these people are prepared to pay the market price, because at the end of the day, although carbon credits is not really a commodity, but it looks like a commodity. The price nowadays around, as Claire mentioned, about $30–35 for good programs, as long as the people are prepared to pay that money, because that's the market. Other people pay for that. So if they want to pay for it, it's fine. There's no problem. But it would not be fair if you have a specific customer say, okay, we want the carbon credits, but we only pay 25. No, it is the market price. And we use Rabobank now is the price discovery mechanism. There are big corporates buying there, so that is the market price, and it's trending up, and it will continue trending up because not being part of this will be more expensive. So people are investing that in a big time. But as you know, it's a commercial business. People try to buy it as cheap as possible, and we try to sell as expensive as possible. And somewhere in the middle, we do the transactions. But the important part is now the price optimization. But the other part, which is very important, to make sure that in this case with Accor and Rabobank, 18% of that revenue goes back to the farmer. And that is really very significant. If you just give you an average, we've been selling these carbons, or the price we paid out to the farmers last year is about $20 per ton. And an average cocoa farmer with a transformation to more agroforestry can fetch up to 7 tons per hectare. And if you then an average farm is about 3.5 hectares, so you talk about 20, 22, 23 tons times 17. That's a lot of additional income for cocoa farmers, and we have to make sure that they get that money in their wallet, and nobody's there to borrow it and forget to pay back.
Yep, indeed. Just quickly, there's a question from Isaac. How do we know that the carbon credit markets are not a Ponzi scheme? So it's a question about, I suppose, about the ethics and the accountability of these systems.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a consideration to look at, and because, as I mentioned, it looks like a commodity, but it's not really a commodity. It is for a certain lifespan, about 20 years. But the fact to set up programs which you can do measurable impact with regards to carbon sequestration there. Now, Jasper will talk about it, how we do that now, the satellite measurements of biomass and verification whether that is actually happening. On our side, we have proof of the trees we are planting and the biodiversity, that kind of stuff. So that's the real stuff. So I have no problem to show people what we do, to have audits and whatever. But at the same time, because it's invisible, and as Claire already mentioned, there are different standards. The methodology of measurement is not so clear. Auditors, we know how auditors operate in certain countries on this planet. It has a shady side. And I think it's our role as serious and ethical business people to make sure that it works and that the farmers who do the work are the beneficiaries. And the rest we have to deal with, like everybody else. Now, people are speeding with their cars on the motorways. People are fiddling with weights and humidity, whatever. That's human nature. But this, I think we should be very sure that we don't get people think it might be a Ponzi scheme or something similar. But that's our role to protect this, because it is so important, because you combine fantastic things: climate change risk mitigation, CO2. Hopefully, you can do something on methane as well, and at the same time, rural development. Without holding up your hand. It's as I said earlier, it's very important. African people are very proud people, and they want to be independent. They want to show that they can run their own show without giving handouts. This is the perfect scenario for that.
Indeed. Look, thank you for that. We could keep talking for a long time.
Yep.
But I'm going to move on to our next speaker.
Yeah, I'll switch off. Yeah.
If you could, please, that would be great. And we are going to go to Jasper. I hope I've pronounced your name right.
Very correct, Steve. Thank you.
Good morning. So I'm very, very grateful for you to join us this morning. Rabobank has obviously got a fantastic reputation, being originally a cooperative bank established by farmers. So for an organization like Rabobank to be talking to a group of amazing young entrepreneurs from across Africa is absolutely perfect. And I know that you're very, very involved within the carbon credits markets, particularly through the ACORN program. And so I would like to hand over to yourself to try to share some of your own perspectives on this really important topic. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve, and thanks for to the Agripreneurship Alliance for the invitation. I think short to introduce myself. Well, my name is Jasper Sneller, currently an account manager specifically focusing on Southern and Western Africa within the ACORN program, and I'll tell you more about that during the next 10 minutes. I think Clarice and Michiel already set the scene. So thank you for that. I think topics like land tenure, transparent pricing, high cost of measurement, those have been mentioned, and I'll touch upon that in a minute. I'm not sure if I did think I shared a presentation, Stephen.
I've got it here on my screen. I will bring up your first slide. Yeah,
perfect. Thanks a lot. So indeed, the program that I'm going to discuss for the next 10 minutes is called ACORN. It's an acronym for Agroforestry Carbon Removal Units, CRUs in short. That's 1 metric ton of carbon for the organic restoration of nature. You can go to the next slide, please. And I'll shortly. There's a bit of background. I think Stephen, you already touched upon it, but. Rabobank is a food and agri bank, is world's leading food and agri bank. It is originally founded by farmers as well, over 100 years ago. That is why we still are developing certain propositions to support farmers and also small-scale farmers, amongst others, in Africa. The main aim of the program is, as you can see in the second row, is to combat climate change, land degradation, and food insecurity. On a global scale, and at the same time, we think with the ACORN program we can provide our clients with high integrity carbon removal unit. But that's a bit of background of why ACORN is under the. All right, next slide, please. All right, so I think it's good to set the scene here in terms of the main aim of our program, and the main aim of the ACORN program is to make small-scale farmers more resilient towards changing climate, land degradation, and food insecurity. That is our main aim, and we believe that if small-scale farmers would make the transition from more or less of a monoculture towards an agroforestry-based system, it would make them more resilient towards these challenges. So that is the main aim, to specifically support small-scale farmers in the transition to agroforestry. We do so by we can measure carbon remotely using satellite images. So if farmers are planting trees, we're able to measure the growth in biomass and pay out a fair share. But we see that carbon payment as a motivation, as an incentive for those small-scale farmers to make that transition, to support them into transition. So carbon farming is not the aim per se in this case. You can go to the next slide, please. What we then focus on, I think it's good to mention that as well. There are different types of carbon credits and carbon removal units. For example, RED+, which is avoided deforestation. That is something that we do not engage in. We solely focus on actual additional carbon that is being removed from the atmosphere. So additional trees that are being planted. That's why we don't call it carbon credits, we call it carbon removal units, because it's additional carbon that is being removed from the atmosphere by planting additional trees. So it's a nature-based solution, and we sell that on the voluntary carbon market for a minimum price of 20 euros per ton. But we're organizing auctions for large corporates so they can bid on carbon removal units. So we hope over time that price increases. And during the last auction, it was actually a minimum price of 31 euros per carbon removal unit. So we see that price already going up, and as mentioned before, 80% flows back to the farmers. So that is a good thing, I would say. You could go to the next slide. I'm not sure if I need to elaborate a whole lot more here, but if you would compare a more of a monoculture with an agroforestry based system, there are multiple benefits. It improves the soil health. There will be more nutrients stored in the soil. The roots of those trees will make sure there's more water available, also for annual and perennial crops. If a farmer would make the switch towards an agroforestry based system, also his or her income would be diversified, because they would not only be dependent on one single crop. So we strongly believe that transition towards agroforestry is not the solution, but is part of the solution to make small-scale farmers more resilient. And the payment out of carbon is an incentive there. You can go to the next slide. I think it's mentioned before already, but when we are measuring remotely using satellite images the growth in biomass, so the sequestration of carbon, we can measure that. We can sell that on the voluntary carbon market to large customers like Microsoft, like Standard Chartered, that want to offset or inset even their emissions. We pay out 90% towards our local partners, being in this case Farmstrong in Côte d'Ivoire. Farmstrong was actually our first partner that we work with, a very reliable partner as well. So we keep 10% to cover all our costs. 90% of the sale, which is relatively high, will be paid out to the local partner, Farmstrong Foundation. They can keep 10% for all the effort they put in, and 80%, so an actual fair share, will be paid out to the farmer. We have already, the first millions have already been transferred towards those farmers. So we see that it works. So as Michiel from Farmstrong mentioned, payments are done digitally. So it's very traceable, it's very transparent. If you would look on the Acorn website, which I will share afterwards as well, you will be able to see the registry of the carbon removal units that have been sold, and they are retired. So there's no possibility for companies to speculate on those carbon removal units. They're immediately retired. But that's also how we make sure, one of the reasons how we make sure that a fair share will actually go of 80% towards those farmers. As you can see, the average carbon removal potential could be 4 to 6 carbon removal units per year. So we do a yearly measurement. And the minimum price for which we sell is 25 euros. The last transaction was already higher, and we believe that will increase. So there is we believe there is an actual incentive or motivation for those farmers to maintain the agroforestry design that has been implemented, because if they do so, they will receive a yearly income. And the aim of the program is that we want to, over time, make farmers realize that an agroforestry design is actually beneficial for them. And we hope that payment out of carbon will motivate them in that sense. You can go to the next slide. I think I'm not going to touch upon it too long, because it has already been mentioned. Usually there are very high certification costs involved for carbon-specific carbon programs. All the certification costs will be paid by Acorn, will be borne by us. So there's no certification cost whatsoever for the local partner, in this case Farmstrong, or the farmers themselves. The monitoring of carbon removal units as well. So because we measure with satellite imagery and remote sensing the growth, all those costs will be borne by us. So there's no need for Farmstrong or the farmers to pay for that. And that is how we realize also, obviously we take out the 10% from the sale to cover all our costs, but that's how we realize a fair payment towards a farmer, because in the end, the farmer should benefit from the program. That is the main aim. Go to the next slide. So what we have done, Acorn has developed its own certification under the wings of Plan Vivo. So both the ACORN framework and methodology have been certified, meaning if we would work with, for example, a local partner like Farmstrong, their project is automatically certified. So there's no need for an individual certification, which makes it pragmatic, but also very cost efficient. Secondly, and I think on the middle image it shows very well, this is exactly how we measure the growth in carbon. So we request, that is something we do request to, for example, Farmstrong, to go to each field of every individual farmer and to map the boundaries of his or her field. So we know exactly where to measure the growth in carbon. We've created a platform for which it's very, and it's also visible on our website. So you have, for every individual farmer, we would have the location name, the phone number as well. So Farmstrong is able to digitally pay out the farmers, but we can monitor the growth every single year, or the decline, but hopefully the growth of biomass, so sequestration of carbon, every single year. So it's very traceable, it's very transparent. We want to be open, and I think the way forward for the carbon market is to be open, to be traceable, to be as transparent as possible, and to make sure that at the same time the benefits flow to the individual small-scale farmer, because those are the ones that should benefit. For example, with Farmstrong, that is something that we have realized over the past few years. But that is also the reason why we believe what we do results in high quality carbon removal units, meaning large off-takers are willing to pay a higher price, which eventually benefits the small-scale farmers. The next slide, I think, yeah, you may skip this one, and then I think there's one last one. Oh yeah, no, two more, and then I'll so yeah, so I think this gives a brief overview of what ACORN is doing together with partners like Farmstrong. There are 3 pillars, as you can see on the left-hand side. There is the farmers and the local partners that we work with. Those are key within our proposition, because we only provide a service of measuring carbon, generating carbon removal units, selling that to large off-takers like Microsoft, like Standard Chartered, and paying out like a fair share again. So we are highly dependent on strong local partners and the farmers that they work with. We provide that service of measuring carbon, and on the right hand side there are the buyers. So this is in a nutshell how we believe, and obviously this is one of the programs. There are others out there, but we believe using this system we're able to provide fair payments towards farmers, and I think that is the aim of the program. Thank you.
I've gone 1 too far forwards. Thank you so much for making a very complex topic quite understandable. If I can get my head around what you're doing, I'm sure that many others can. I know that there's going to be some questions, and I'm going to invite my colleague Sheila to come on in just a moment, just to see if there are any questions in the chat room. But I have one question for you, if I may, just to start with, which is that in terms of the system that you're running, this idea of smallholder farmers coming together with a local partner who then engages with yourself through the ACORN program. Obviously, this is an aggregation system. How do you select local partners? If an African organization wanted to come to you to explore the potential for them to join ACORN with their farmers, how do they do that? And is there, I suppose, is there a business opportunity there for young entrepreneurs in Africa to look at this as a way to run an ethical, sustainable business?
Yeah, great question, Stephen. So try to answer it shortly. In principle, we would like to talk with anyone that would be interested, but obviously the costs of measuring, monitoring, certification are relatively high at this point in time. That is the reason, and the program only exists for almost 3 years, so it's a relatively new program, which is the reason we at this point in time say there should be a minimum of 10,000 hectares or 10,000 farmers for it to make a viable business case for us, for the local partner, but also for the farmer. So that is at this point in time one of the harder requirements. Over time, when we roll the program out, we believe the cost will reduce, and we're also able to onboard the relatively smaller projects. But in principle, we're open to talk with anyone. We also see smaller projects being incorporated or work together with somewhat larger already participating organizations. But it would be good to keep into account that we do not believe that it should be an organization purely focused on carbon farming, because that should not, we believe, be the aim. It should be an ideally be an organization that is already engaged with small-scale farmers, that knows how to train them, to educate them, that the small-scale farmers are familiar with, that perhaps have already a certain infrastructure in place in terms of payments, for example. So and then it could be also for that organization an interesting opportunity, I would say.
No, thank you. I think something that came clearly through for myself in your presentation was that it was precisely that idea that the carbon market that you're involved in is actually more to do with sustainable development of those farms and the livelihood of those farmers, rather than just a money making scheme based on the carbon removal units that you have established.
Great, thank you.
Can I ask Sheila, can you come online for a moment? Just audibly would be fine. Do we have any questions in the chat room for either Jasper, Michiel, or Clarice?
Hi, Steve.
Hey there.
So we have a couple of questions for Jasper and for Michiel. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it well.
Perfectly fine. It's very hard on the throat, my name.
Please, would you like to share the questions?
Okay, the first one from Michiel. It's from Idani. And he asks, he says, Michiel, thanks for your presentation. The question is, do you think donors should work with concessional and commercial investors to establish blended finance solutions that can finance upfront investments into smallholder farmers?
I think this is an excellent question. It's precisely what we're looking at the moment. How can we, basically, turbocharge the program rollout? Because we've started very early with this stuff, and that's why we are the biggest supplier to Rabo at this moment of time. So the start-up cost, which was referred to a few times, is relatively important, but once you've got this ball rolling, the amount of money your service implementation fee actually would allow you to mobilize more money. So I'm definitely looking at all sorts of finance, blended finance. There I think a lot of organizations who are more and more interested actually in environmental impact investment, especially if you can combine it, as I explained, with the social part. But you have to have, of course, a very solid program with very good partners that you not mess it up. But it's definitely possible, and I would now delighted now to be able to support Steven and the rest of the team. What kind of programs can we develop to attract more financing from wherever it comes, as long as we stay within the recommendations or the rules of the game with Rabobank. So biggest part to the farmer, and that kind of stuff, because there is a lot of money there, and when there's a lot of money there, people behavior sometimes changes. So it is possible, it will happen, but we have to make sure that it happens correctly with the benefits for the people involved as it should. I hope I answered the question, because it is you type it in now on Google and you see how many people are involved in environmental and climate impact investment. They make a lot of money, but nothing for the farmer, or very little for the farmer, and that's what we have to avoid, and that's why we have such a good collaboration with Jasper and Rabobank, because that's exactly what we do. Our focus is improve the livelihood of farmers, their ecosystem, by working on carbon sequestration and pay out as much as we can to them with objectives described.
No, thank you for that, Michael. Sheila, stay there. I want you to stay online, but I know that some of Michael's colleagues from Côte d'Ivoire would like to come on screen as well.
Yeah.
So would you, sorry, it's Ghislaine and
Vincent.
Vincent, would you like to come on screen?
Yeah. And the support for the translator, because they will feel more confident in French than English.
Exactly. So if we could have
now the English speakers need to go into the globe at the bottom, interpretation, and I think they need to click on the English, and then we should have the translation coming through there. Okay.
Indeed. And so Vincent and
Ghislaine, Ando.
Ghislaine.
When those guys are dialing in, Ando is responsible, as described, for the nurseries and the distribution and all the payouts if it goes around it. And Vincent is the program manager who has the contact with the farmers. Vincent, allez-y.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Voilà.
Moi, c'est Justin Ando.
Bonjour, ça va?
Oui, je vais très bien. Oui, je suis à Farmstrong depuis pratiquement 6 ans. Donc, je suis spécialisé dans la production des arbres, production des pépinières, avec des associations des femmes, des groupes de jeunes, et puis aussi des communautés. Donc, c'est des activités à plusieurs niveaux. Il y a la formation que nous réalisons avec ces communautés, et nous avons aussi une activité génératrice de revenus qui est créée derrière, parce que nous faisons la production, nous mettons à leur disposition tout le matériel qu'il faut, les semences, tout ce qui est intrant, comme sachets et autres. Donc, tout ce que nous faisons, c'est carrément bio. Nous n'utilisons pas de produits chimiques là-dedans. Voilà. Donc, pour la recherche des semences, elle est un peu plus complexe, mais nous avons pris attache avec des jeunes, des groupes de jeunes qui sont dans certains campements où nous avons la possibilité d'avoir des semences. Ils font la recherche et puis ils sont rémunérés à l'arrière. Et on se permet maintenant de faire la production. Jusqu'à ce jour, nous sommes à plus d'1 million d'arbres produits et distribués et plantés. Donc, cela nous permet de faire l'agroforesterie à grande échelle. Nous avons aussi la restauration de forêts et nous avons aussi la création d'emplois biodiversité. Derrière cela, on a la formation des élèves dans les écoles. Parce que c'est vrai que nous parlons d'agroforesterie, nous parlons de reforestation, nous parlons de planter des arbres, mais cela aussi doit commencer depuis le bas âge. Donc, dans les écoles primaires, nous faisons le planting pour embellir, pour créer aussi un cadre de vie, un cadre d'apprentissage sain, avec un peu plus d'ombrage pour permettre aux enfants de pouvoir se reposer lorsqu'il y a les récréations et les heures creuses. Maintenant, avec les producteurs, ce que nous faisons actuellement, c'est l'agroforesterie à grande échelle. Donc, selon les régions, nous avons 25 arbres à l'hectare. Il y a des endroits où nous allons jusqu'à 100 arbres à l'hectare parce que le climat il est propice à accueillir les arbres. En plus de cela, nous faisons les lignées tout autour des plantations qui nous permettent d'avoir des haies vives tout autour des plantations pour protéger aussi ces plantations-là contre les grands vents, les vents violents et autres. Derrière, aujourd'hui, avec le projet de Rabobank, qui nous permet de rémunérer les producteurs qui arrivent à planter et à entretenir les arbres. Donc, jusqu'à ce jour, nous sommes à près de, avec Essoubre et Abango, nous sommes à près de 4000 producteurs qui ont été déjà rémunérés. Et c'est à travers le mobile money. mobile money et aussi par la banque. Ça nous permet d'avoir une certaine transparence et éviter que l'argent du producteur puisse partir ailleurs. C'est sûr que quand avec le mobile money, le producteur, il est sûr d'avoir son argent et puis nous le faisons sûrement à des périodes où il y a moins d'activités financières pour eux. Donc, c'est toujours la bienvenue et les producteurs sont toujours enthousiasmés de recevoir ces fonds à cette période-là. Voilà. Donc, c'est un peu plus ou moins ce que nous faisons. Nous sommes tout le temps en contact avec les producteurs. Les plans de cette année, nous sommes à près de 600 000 plans produits. Nous avons démarré depuis la semaine dernière les distributions des plans aux producteurs avec suivi de planting. Donc, nous avons dans certains endroits des équipes pour planter avec les producteurs. Par contre, il y a d'autres endroits où c'est les producteurs volontairement qui font le planting directement dans leur plantation. Donc, nous faisons le suivi avec eux pour pouvoir collecter les données et puis partager à nos partenaires. Merci à vous.
Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Moi, c'est Kwakuyao Vincent, superviseur programme et en charge de tout ce qui est data collecte dans les plantations et de tout ce qui est bonne pratique agricole. Donc, pour ne pas revenir sur tout ce que Ando a dit, que Farmstrong fait déjà, en plus des équipes qui sont en charge de tout ce qui est distribution d'arbres d'ombrage, Farmstrong travaille au niveau des régions avec des farmer trainers, donc des jeunes avec un bon niveau scolaire que Farmstrong a formé et outillé pour être aux côtés des producteurs, pour les aider à mettre en place tout ce qui est bonne pratique agricole, y compris l'agroforesterie. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes en contact permanent avec les producteurs parce qu'ils s'en rendent compte effectivement du changement climatique et donc de l'effet, de l'impact de ce changement-là sur les productions agricoles. Donc, c'est facile pour eux aujourd'hui d'accepter les arbres qui sont distribués et ils sont plus enthousiasmés même à les planter. Et les farmers trainers aident toute l'équipe d'agroforesterie à superviser et à aider les producteurs à effectivement planter les arbres dans les plantations, les délimitations, comme Ando l'a dit, et tous ceux, des planteurs, il y a des planteurs qui veulent vraiment créer des forêts privées. Et à ceux-là, l'équipe d'agroforesterie est toujours disponible pour leur donner des plans et les encadrer avec toutes les autorités en Côte d'Ivoire qui sont impliquées dans la reforestation pour que ce projet-là marche. Donc, voilà un peu ce que je peux compléter en plus de ce que Ando a dit. Voilà.
No, thank you so much to Vincent and Ando. Merci beaucoup. Michael, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, just towards something I totally forgot to mention in my little intervention. But if we talk about the CO2 sequestration or what goes around it, what was mentioned by my colleagues, the setup of these nurseries involving youth and women who are actually producing those trees, and we buy them back, creates yet another flow of income for the farmers and the families and communities. And we have this specific activity with planting trees around schools. There are many primary schools, so we put on different trees to make the schoolyards nicer, but it gives you an excellent opportunity also to talk to the teachers and the children about the importance of forest, trees, nature, the risk of climate change. So there's also a didactic angle, which I forgot to mention earlier. So thanks to the colleagues that they brought that up.
No, thank you for that. Sheila, are there any other questions within the chat room?
Yes, there are. We have one more question for Michael and his team. There are actually two. One is, how do oil palm plantations perform as carbon credit earners? That's from David Adiza from Abuja. And then the second one is from Isaac Nyabia. He says, very interesting. How does this square up with tree planting taking the place of food crop when everybody is complaining that there is not enough land? Do we have enough land for this? There is the issue of people discovering gold on this forest and will go ahead and dig trenches on the land, perhaps without your consent. So,
can I possibly add just one little bit more to this, which is something linking something Jasper said as well, which is the idea of, is there a risk of promotion of non-native tree crops? So we talk about palm oil, monoculture, we talk about eucalyptus. What is there actually a threat or a weakness of being able to promote biodiversity, or are we just going into another monocultural approach?
Well, I thought I mentioned it in the intervention. So agricultural crops are not considered as carbon sinks or place to store carbon. That has to do with the life cycle. Now, theoretically, now you could say a oil palm tree would fit into it because of the lifespan, but that's not. The idea is that if you work on these things, that you respect a certain biodiversity, and that's also valued in the price. So that's why I mentioned that we actually do the GPS of the trees we plant, so we know which tree we planted where. So that will help audits. And at the same time, we will test this year a new technology which is called eDNA in English, which is environmental DNA. So you actually do a kind of DNA test on water and soil, where you can actually show how many different species are living in the area of operation. So that is a proof. Also, the Isaac question, I think, was very interesting with regards to food crops. That would actually be an interesting topic for the whole other session, because if you look what is being promoted in many countries around the globe, and specifically certain African countries, still are export crops, which are not eaten by the local population, or cannot even be eaten. I think the only product which is now produced and eaten locally is palm. But if you look at cocoa, coffee, cashew, rubber, shea nut, and you name it, cola nut, all these crops are exported. And so I think there should be made space available to produce more food crops for local consumption, but in a system where you maintain or introduce biodiversity and a maximum of woody non-agriculture woody biomass to be able to benefit from these programs and do good. Because at the end of the day, the beauty of this is that the physical efforts are relatively low. You plant trees and you nurture trees is different from plowing and pruning and whatever. And that's very cocoa specific, and in coffee, I'm sure we'll see the same. That the moment farmers figure out that there is money in the non-agriculture woody biomass, they may actually start pruning to have that other income grow faster. Yeah. And you know what happens if you start pruning your cocoa trees, and your coffee trees gives you more cocoa and more coffee. So you'll have some interesting positive side effects of this whole thing. And if that productivity of those agricultural crops go up, you may see a lower rate of expansion of these crops because you have a higher productivity. So but that's something you have to prove over the years.
Yeah, and to come back perhaps very short to the agroforestry design. So we ourselves we are not agroforestry experts. So once we are engaging with a local party, we always say there must be someone with extensive local agroforestry knowledge involved to see, is there a market for the species that are implemented? Do we not only plant invasive species? Are there nurseries to be set up? Are there perhaps already? So there should always be someone involved with extensive local agroforestry knowledge, as we would never be the ones deciding which trees to be planted at a specific project.
Thank you for that. I know that Anne has a question.
I have a follow-on question. Can you plant, other crops under the trees, like beans and pumpkins and crops of this nature that can also provide food at the same time as you're doing this agroforestry?
I can answer if you want, if you allow me. Actually, the choice of the shade trees is very important. Not all the shade trees are compatible with the crop you are growing. So you should not, of course, plant trees which are competing with your agricultural crop, your main crop or your food crops. But they should live now in harmony. There are definitely trees which have the root system on the same level as cocoa or coffee or other things. You should avoid those. There are trees with far too much and far too thick canopy cover, which you should not use. There are certain trees which are hosts of cocoa swollen shoot virus. Of course, you should not plant those in a cocoa plantation. And that is what Jasper referred to. If you talk about the design of agroforestry systems or corridors or whatever, you really have to do that now with a certain level of knowledge. Otherwise, now the farmer may get some extra cash, but if his main revenue disappears, that's of course exactly what we don't want. This should be additional revenue, and especially the nice of this one is it's actually paid out outside of the main agricultural crops harvest. So when money is tight, we do the payout of the carbon.
I can see that Charles Ordock has his hand raised.
Okay, Charles, would you like to come on? And it is we have gone well over time. So Charles, would you like to come on and ask the final question of the session?
Oh yes, very briefly. Thank you very much, all the presenters, for your very informative information on these areas of climatic change. My question is, I come from a background where the community have land. They are willing to cooperate or partner with organizations, but they are poor. They use rudimentary tools for agricultural production. You can easily mobilize the 10,000 people that is needed minimum with land, but it's the poverty and the capacity to grow crops or plant trees is very lacking. How can such a community be helped? I can help mobilize them. I have an organization that I've just founded with my background in disaster events and management. So I chose to open it. But in that very particular area, there is massive cutting of trees that even the Chief Justice of Uganda that spoke just about 1 week ago, how trees are being cut off completely, and it was just lamenting. So how can an organization be involved? And we are willing to welcome them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I do think it would be useful to discuss this also bilaterally instead of during the call, but a very short answer. We are open. We're open to work with any organization, but it must be stressed that we do not have any presence on the ground. So we are more than willing to assist any organization with the implementation. For example, if we look at Côte d'Ivoire, we can also always rely on Farmstrong being the implementing party. So that could be definitely a possibility also in other countries. But it's usually a very specific case-to-case question. So please let us then take this up bilaterally, I would say.
If I may add something there, and then I think as Steve said, then it's done for today. I think what is something extremely interesting, again, a phenomenal side effect of what we are doing in Côte d'Ivoire, and again, thanks to the colleagues here in public, is that once these farmers figure out that there is this additional income from carbon sequestration, and they will also be much more conscious about things what we call wildlings. Yes, seedlings come from nurseries, and wildlings you find out in the open. So instead of chopping down the wildlings as weed or spray them to death with chemicals, they will actually now dig them up and put them in a place where they are useful. And that's of course a very interesting additional side effect, which will be turbocharging the carbon sequestration at a very low cost. And again, as Jasper said, I'm happy to discuss. I'm actually myself in Uganda early June So if I will be in Kampala and in the Western world. So if there are opportunities to meet up and exchange, I'm there to help and support. Or we are there, because I'm not functioning alone. Me and my colleagues are there to help.
And I know our team are looking forward to meeting you when you come down to Kampala as well, Mikhail.
Pleasure.
Oh, that would be great.
I'm going to move the conversation on. We are well past time. Can I just thank everybody for participation in this webinar? Next week, so if I can just give my warm thanks and genuine thanks to our friends and colleagues at WBCSD, at Farmstrong Foundation and Rabobank. Thank you so much for joining us today, sharing your knowledge, experience, and insights on this really important topic. Next week, whilst today we've been talking a lot about the carbon markets, next week we hope to be talking about soil, the thing that we walk on, from which most of our food actually grows. And again, linking soil with climate change and entrepreneurial opportunities. So next week, soil, same time, same day, same link. We look forward to seeing you there. As always, thank you to our sponsor for supporting this webinar series. And if you have any information or you would like to ask any questions, please do reach out to any of us at any time. Thank you. Thank you to everybody who's spoken. Thank you to everybody who's shared. Thank you to everybody who's participated. And thank you as well to our wonderful translator, Rin. Thank you. Take care. Be safe.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Stigsta. Thank you, Jasper. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay.